Let's discuss 15 things that Civil War reenactors, the women, need to stop doing. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I teach old-fashioned sewing skills and we copy original garments. I have 20 plus years experience within sewing and 12 plus years experience within living history as a hobby. And I hope to impart to my viewers the importance of going back to the primary sources and representing history to the best of our ability. I really want this channel to be a place of education for everyone involved, and that includes me. So I'm always willing to take on new research if you have any information that I don't. First of all, this is going to be fairly image heavy, so if you're listening to this video, you may want to come back and watch it at a later time. Most of the things we're going to be debunking are physical things, so visuals very much help here. Secondly, I'll likely offend a lot of costumers and camping with a theme reenactors, and that is okay. I'm pretty used to offending people at this point. We do a primary documentation here. We don't deal with hearsay. We don't deal with, well, it makes sense, it's logical. None of that happens here. This is all primary documentation. And some people just don't know that they're wrong until they're told that they're wrong, and we are here to educate people. This is not meant to be a slap in the face at all, but if some of these apply to you, it might be a chance to better your impression. I've done some of these things too before I knew better, so this is really just me imparting knowledge. And I'm always here to answer questions as well. I've set aside 15 things that I see people who reenact the American Civil War do, and that are wrong, and some of them we have covered in other videos and some we have not, but I'm kind of organizing them all into one video, and I've organized them into the categories of clothing, accessories, and headwear. So we'll look at 5 myths from each category. So let's start with clothing. First off, we have not wearing proper underwear. People can't tell if I'm wearing it or not. Yes, we actually can. I may not be able to tell if you're wearing a tank top instead of a chemise, that is true, but it can be seen if you put no effort into your underclothes. Underclothes are the foundation of all things. If you don't have the basic layers, you're never going to look right. Period. I can't tell you how many young ladies wear leggings or biker shorts underneath their hoop and call it a day. I have seen the way you people swing about your hips in those hoops. We can absolutely see your biker shorts underneath. First off, if you're going to wear a hoop, you need to actually practice wearing one. You need to practice walking, dancing, sitting, and just properly functioning in a hoop. It does take practice. It's not something someone can do just right off. It does take time to learn how to wear one like a lady. And also, you should be wearing a petticoat underneath your hoop, but preferably also drawers and a chemise. And we've discussed at length how easy it is to tell if someone is not wearing a corset, and I won't repeat too much here, but yes, we can tell. I don't care how thin you or in shape you are, it is possible to tell. Corsets change your bust placement, your torso shape, how your dress fits, how you move, how you posture yourself, etc. So please wear one. Nearly every woman in the 19th century in a Western culture is going to be wearing a corset by the 1860s. Even poor folks and those who are traveling out west, I've looked into it. Just please wear a corset. And not one of those stupid polyester ones from Amazon or just online. You need a proper mid-19th century corset. The shapes are different. It should not go above your bust. It should end just above your nipple line. It needs to be nicely shaped where you get a good triangular, defined waist, and your hips go out, and it shouldn't be too long, and it should not be made out of polyester. You definitely want the natural fibers here. Corsets change with the time period, and something labeled Victorian isn't going to help you here. You need a proper Civil War era corset. There are corset makers such as Originals by Kay, Red Threaded, that will at least get you going in the right direction. If made to you and your measurements, they are not uncomfortable. But let's go ahead and go back to hoops for a moment. Wear a petticoat over your hoops, please. At least one, maybe two, but at least one. No one needs to be seeing the rungs of your hoop through your dress. That extra petticoat is there to soften those lines and to make it look better. It'll also help with the swaying back and forth just a little bit because that extra fabric weight will help keep the hoop in place. And no, hoops with the ruffles on top are not accurate, so they are not a good cheat for not wearing a petticoat over top. They are not right. Wear a proper hoop, whether that be covered or a wire one, and then wear a petticoat or two over top. And speaking of hoops, let's go to number 2, which is thinking that working people did not wear hoops. Au contraire, women loved their hoops. Maids wore hoops, nurses wore hoops, some laundresses wore hoops. It got bad enough to where some factories were banning them because of safety. So So factory women were coming to work in hoops until they were banned, and then they still had them, so they were wearing them, outside of work. This does mean that some people absolutely are not going to be wearing hoops because their jobs forbid it. It is also a general good rule not to wear a large hoop around a fire, although a smaller one is absolutely fine. But not wearing hoops should not be the norm for most situations. People should be wearing hoops, particularly in public. Most often I see laundresses not wearing them, and of course there are some refugees who don't wear them, and then the reform dress or the bloomer outfit, you usually don't see them wearing hoops either. Those would really be the only times that you would have an impression that would not really be wearing a hoop, because you don't generally do factory worker impressions that are working. We don't have factories to go pretend to work. So most of the situations that we are in as living historians, you're going to want a hoop. Women were still trying to get their hands on hoops, which shows how important that they were. Remember, this is an era where people would have rather to stay at home and not be seen than to be in public not dressed properly. We saw this in the 1860 Harper story, My Velvet Shoes, that we discussed several myth-busting videos ago, where Mr. Lambswool happened to get a glimpse of his wife's crinoline one morning when he woke before her. They were a poor couple, and her hoop was old, decrepit, and 6 months out of style. Would you believe that? A whole 6 months. So Mr. Lambswool realized then that his wife had been declining social engagements, and it suddenly hit him that that was because his wife didn't feel like she was up to par with the hoop shape that was 6 months out of date. And so she was staying home to avoid seeing people. We also see this fact in diaries. A Rebel Wife in Texas, the diary and letters of Elizabeth Scott Neblett from 1852 to 1864, which is on my bookshelf. Mrs. Neblett has some things to say about the state of her clothes during the Civil War from a Texas perspective. Quote, "I know how bad it is to desire to go into company and forced to stay at home for the want of proper apparel. I never desired much to have fine dressing, yet still I have stinted myself woefully all my life. If I could recall the past, I would act differently. I would spend a little more on myself than I did. But that is past, and I haven't a black silk to be buried in." End quote. Earlier, she spoke about her homespun dresses. Quote, "I wish you'd gotten me a calico dress like Oliver got from Mrs. O. Gave $50, 'tis good calico and dark enough. He sent it by Warren. I have no hopes now of getting a dress. Dr. Kerr has calico in town selling for $10 per yard, but I live in the woods where nobody will see me, and if I can only get my homespun wool, I'll be fixed. In haste, yours affectionately, Lizzie." End quote. Again, she's not wearing nice clothing. She's making a homespun wool, but she considers that okay to wear only because she lives where no one will see her. If you aren't dressed properly, you avoided other people, which is hard to do at a Civil War reenactment. You are there to be seen. Therefore, if you're not going to dress properly, you would have stayed home. So let's use this mindset and dress appropriately when we're at events. Now, this does not always mean wearing hoops, but it does mean wearing a proper dress and basic proper underpinnings to include at least a corset and petticoats. Bonus for a real chemise and not a tank top and drawers and hoops for most women. Hoops were common enough to where they were constantly being made fun of for being ridiculous, so people had to be wearing them in weird to us places for the tabloids to poke fun. Number 3 is wearing the blouses and the cotton skirts, particularly for working class or poor people. We did cover this rather extensively, a few myth-busting videos again about wearing the mismatched clothing, but we will cover it a bit here. This is extremely prevalent and very persistent clothing choice of Civil War reenactors, and it is wrong. These images that you see of mismatched clothing are actually very high fashion garments, typically of wool. Occasionally you do see them in silk. These tops are not blouses. Seriously, stop calling them blouses. Please stop calling them blouses. That is a bodice or a body or a waist, sometimes a shirt, not a blouse. Please stop calling it a blouse. Most often they are called bodice or body or waist. The white ones are extremely sheer. I mean, you should be able to read a book through the fabric. It is that see-through. It is very fine. Usually they're more expensive than silk. Even today, you can get those types of fabrics, but they often are extremely expensive. Sometimes those bodices are also silk, but most often they are cotton. But again, the types of cotton they are using are just as expensive as true silk, and sometimes, again, even more expensive than actual silk. Yes, the period illustrations say they're made of muslin. That is not modern muslin, that is 1860s muslin. Terms have changed in the last 160, 70 odd years. Very nice garments. You can see in the images how sheer they are, and there are extents of these, so we can see what they're made of. The darker ones are going to be usually red wool, and the The darker ones are sometimes red wool, and they are called Garibaldi shirts or bodies. The white ones are not called Garibaldis. I know that's a popular term for this whole ensemble, is calling it a Garibaldi. That is not what that is. A white waist and a skirt is typically what that is called. If you are wearing a red wool bodice with a corresponding wool or silk skirt, that is a Garibaldi. And they're the red ones specifically, and they're emulating a very specific military style of dress. And there's also silk separate bodices, and also some wool ones, especially in the mid to late post-war era. But none of these are in cotton. These are fine, expensive, and very fashionable ensembles. If you want to portray the average person, wear a one-piece dress. This is not the type of outfit you're looking for to portray the average person. A common excuse I hear is, well, if they only had a few yards of one fabric and a few yards of another, of course they're just going to make a separate bodice and skirt. And that is a very clear way to tell me that you know nothing about 19th century culture and social norms without actually telling me that you've never studied this time period. This is not a time period that keeps fabric stashes. That's not a thing. You went to the store to buy a dress. The shopkeeper shows you dress lengths of fabric. You buy a dress. It's really a dress length of fabric, but we call it a dress in the 19th century. You take it to your dressmaker. The dressmaker makes it up or works with you to create a pattern so that you can go make it up at home. And then you have a dress. People don't keep fabric stashes in the 19th century. They keep scraps for things like quilts, patches, that sort of thing, but they don't keep lengths of fabric. You bought fabric as you needed it. And if a shopkeeper have remnants left, they are kept and sold to people who need them for children's clothing. They're not sold for separate women's stuff. Just having 3 yards of one fabric and 5 yards of another just in your house randomly would be incredibly strange in the 19th century. But then you say, well, what happens if something happens to the bodice and the skirt's still in good condition, or if the skirt gets damaged and you still have a good bodice? They wouldn't have been thrown out. They would have just made a new piece for it out of different fabric. Well, actually, a cotton skirt in good condition can be cut up for clothing pieces of other family members and a new dress purchase. That's usually the way that goes. And that is if you can't just mend or fix whatever happened to whatever bodice or skirt piece happened. If you caught fire, you're trying to mend that. I've done that a couple times, and you can mend, and it's absolutely possible to mend those in a way that is not noticeable whatsoever. Same with bodices. If you get rips or anything around any of your clothes, it's very easy to fix. So most small things are going to be mended, not just thrown out. Anything extremely big, you're going to cut around and make whatever you can out of what's left, and then go buy yourself a new dress. Again, I'll link the other myth busting video where I really dive deep into the written sources, but we really need to stop using modern logic to solve historic problems. Yes, people are still people, and there are a lot of things about the human experiences and our desires and our thoughts that have not changed much throughout history. But even if we're living in the same geographical area as our ancestors, that doesn't mean that we're from the same culture and process and experience things the same way. And it's also very important for us to remember that we cannot view the 19th century through our 20th and 21st century glasses. Our logic is usually not their logic. Number 4 is going to be the opposite, which people saying that tops and bottoms can never mismatch. This is when we're trying to correct something, which is the bad cotton blouse and skirt, and we go to the other end and saying they never mismatch things. And I've seen this being said before, but that's an oversimplification. And that's also not true. Clearly saw photographs in the last myth that debunked this one. And we can go further beyond bodices and skirts. There's such a thing as a sack and petticoat. Now, most of the time, especially in America, these did match, but sometimes they didn't. But this would not have been something that women would have been wearing while they were being seen by anybody. They would have been wearing these to do basic household chores. Their immediate family would have seen them, but this is not something we wear out in public. This is not something we wear to receive visitors. This is not something that most people get to see us in, right? I recently came across, it's a little bit post-war, but it's a child's book from late 1860s, it's either 68 or 69, and it shows, it's about this little girl who's learning to be useful, and it shows her mom in all these sketches wearing a sack and petticoat, but it's literally just the girl and her mom, and they're doing things like making coffee and mending clothes and doing laundry, but the mom is wearing her sack and petticoat. So let's play a fun little game with this one. This is called What in Tarnation Is This? And basically we're going to look at period photographs and paintings that don't look like 99 of expected, like what you would expect with the dresses 99% of the time, and I'm going to explain to you what's going on and using what I know from studying this for like 15 years. So let's start here. This lady on the right is more or less normal. It's a one-piece dress with a coat, umbrella, bonnet, and she has a bonnet veil. Very nicely dressed. Love the color tinting on this photograph. It's awesome. The lady on the left is also in a very fashionable outfit. She's wearing a dark colored silk or wool bodice, maybe a red Garibaldi shirt. We don't actually know. Cute little necktie and then a light silk or wool skirt. She has a printed shawl wrapped around her. It's why it looks like her sleeves are a different fabric. That's just a shawl. She's also wearing a very fashionable hat, which is a common with these two-piece outfits. You see them more often with hats than you do with, or you see hats more often with these than you do with bonnets. And as hats are very fashionable, somewhat informal versions of headwear for women. Bonnets are going to be the norm, but hats are worn. They're just generally regulated to a younger, more hipper, fashionable crowd, if you know what I'm saying. Not always, but that's a general rule. So these are two great fashion-forward ladies, nothing particularly odd about their clothing. This next one is from Robert E. Lee's memorial, and it's supposedly of Selina Gray, who, when she was enslaved. I actually highly doubt that. A few of us have looked at this, and if this is Civil War era, it is 64 at the very earliest. Marna Davis matched the buttons down the skirt to late 1866 to 1867 in fashion plates, and both of us agree that this is no earlier than 64, but probably no later than 1867. So likely it's an image of the newly freed Mrs. Gray and her two children, not an enslaved image. Although again, it could be, she would just be extremely fashion forward in 64 and 65 if this is her being enslaved. So again, right to left, since that's how I did it last time, we'll just do it this time. Mrs. Gray is wearing a very fashionable skirt. You can tell she's following fashion very closely if the buttons down the front or anything to go by. And both ladies do have gored skirts, and not the straight panels, and that came into fashion in 1863 and was in full swing by 64 and 65, which is why we can't date this image any earlier. It's hard to see the little Mrs. clothing, but the elder daughter is again wearing a very fashionable outfit, common for girls her age. It consists of a wool or silk skirt, fashionably gored, and she has a fine white waist and then a silk jacket. Very fashionable image. Very nice image of some lovely women who are very fashion forward. Next, we have Miss Katie Goodman, and at first glance, you might think she's a maid because she has that apron. Servants wear aprons, right? Well, actually, that's a fancy silk apron, and you might be able to tell by the fabric sheen. These are worn for parlor sewing and such. And she's wearing one of those very fashionable mismatched ensembles. And so this is one of those images that we're going to think that it's poor in that, oh, we can wear the white top and the skirt for poor people because she's wearing an apron, so she must be doing work and she's wearing this ensemble. But you have to actually know fabrics a little bit. You have to know the context behind things and realize that's a silk apron. Okay, this is just a fancy silk apron she made herself, and this is a fashionable outfit. So she's actually being fashionable here, not working. Now this young lady is actually working, and she looks like she's mismatched, doesn't she? Actually, she's wearing a one-piece dress, but her skirt's lifted up out of the way, and we're just seeing the skirt lining and then her blue petticoat. That's a great way to work, though. I highly suggest lifting your skirts if you're out of the way like that. It's fantastic. So much easier to move around. You don't step on your skirts. And so this is a great way to do it, but it looks mismatched, but it's not. We're seeing her skirt lining, not the actual dress fabric. Because most of these skirts in this time period are going to be lined, especially wool and silk skirts. They're going to be lined more often. And so we're actually seeing her skirt lining, even though it does look mismatched to us. The next one is labeled as a servant. At first glance, she looked mismatched, but she isn't. That's just an apron around her waist. You can see the bits. You can see the spits of her skirt at the side. Again, she has a nice fashionable hat and earrings too. In fact, 98% of American working women you'll see in paintings or photographs that look mismatched are actually going to be one of the last two. Either their skirts are tucked up so where it looks mismatched even though it's really not, or there's an apron covering their dress and that apron just happens to be a very wide apron to make it look like they're wearing mismatched outfits. And some of those aprons, again, can be quite wide, so you think there can't possibly be an apron, but if you look very closely enough, you can usually tell. Sometimes it's just the band going across the front, and you're like, oh wait, that's a tie there. That's an apron. And sometimes it's just a very hint of the same fabric here at the very bottom or at the very sides to let you know this is actually a dress and an apron. But again, we do have the option for separates for working class that would consist of a sack and petticoat in the comfort and privacy of one's own home. And separates for fashion can consist of a fine white cotton or wool or silk bodice with a cotton, wool, or sheer skirt. Myth number 5 is that 1860 clothes are boring. And I get it. For some reason, we are under the impression that we don't have a lot of options to suit our taste if we're going to follow fashion. There are precious few patterns that cater to the authentic crowd, and it makes it feel like when you go to an event, that there may be 60 women, but there's only 4 to 5 dresses or dress patterns out there. And it just feels so boring, despite the different fabric choices. It just feels ugh. And I get that. And that's a real shame because there's a ton of variety within 1860s clothing. Yes, the basic shape stays the same of long sleeves, high neck, and full skirt for day wear, but there's a ton of options within that. Let's start with sleeves. First, we have pagoda sleeves, which are really more of a pre-war thing. They kind of hit their peak in 1861. So for the very beginning of the war, you can get away with them. By 1862, they're cut down for other sleeves. But you can get away with them for 1861. And these are actually less than half the size of the longest pagodas I've seen. Sometimes they get quite long. Most of the time, they're a little bit more like this, though. Pagodas are usually also found only in silks and in some sheer dresses. In fact, for sheer dresses, pagoda sleeves will actually stick around for the majority of the war. So you can, if your fabric is see-through, you can get away with them for a little bit longer. Next, we have the trusty bishop sleeve. These are sleeves that are often seen as boring, but still have options. So you can have very full, or you can have a moderately full bishop sleeve. You can have it fitted more at the shoulder and then a very full wrist. Your shoulders can be pleated or gathered. You have all manners of different cuffs that you can put on your bishop sleeves. They don't have to be the plain little 1-inch cuffs. They can be super long. They can be pointed. They can be all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Bishop sleeves or full sleeves can be found in all fibers from cotton to silk to wool and also in sheers. There's actually a odd lack of bishop sleeves and sheer dresses for reenactors, and I don't know why, because they're so billowy and puffy and they look really great in sheers. I don't understand it. And then there's coat sleeves, making their appearance in 1863-ish. So most people think the coat sleeve is a boring sleeve, but it too can be changed up. You can have a very narrow coat sleeve that's very fitted, or you have a really large coat sleeve. You can also puff your coat sleeve, or you can shirr one side of it to make it really pretty and gathered, and that's a nice effect. Other sleeve options do include the gigot, found in silks and wools. I haven't found any in cotton. And I've also seen some puff sleeve, either single, double, or triple puff sleeves with a straight sleeve underneath. And as far as trims go, there are so many options for your silks and wools. Cottons do tend to be left plain or trimmed in self fabric with ruffles or pleats or something like that. But you can still do some cool stuff with self fabric trims. We haven't even talked about the weird fad of having bodice trims just on your cleavage. Yeah, it was a thing. I don't understand why. I've also seen an original bodice. Actually, it was a photograph. And the lady had 2 tassels on her bodice. Guess where? If you guessed exactly where her nipples would be, you would be correct. But no one replicates that. The 19th century can be a very strange time. Also, breasts weren't exactly sexualized like they are today, so that was actually seen as more or less normal. Your actual bodices can even be different. You can do a yoked bodice, which can be, and there are so many different variations of that. You can have like a shaped yoke, you can have a straight yoke. The gathered fabric underneath can be gathered, or it can be pleated, or so many options. You can have a waistband, you don't have to have a waistband. For silks and wools, you can do an asymmetrical bodice. You can do a double asymmetrical bodice. You can do a pointed bodice or a double pointed bodice. Like, you have options, especially for silks and wools. Now that we've talked 5 things that 1860 people need to stop doing with their clothing, let's move on to accessories. Starting with talking about all the accessories that are sold at Settlers that are made of crochet cotton. Stop it. Please just stop it. Put down the crochet hook. Maybe let's burn the modern cotton yarn. Let's just think about this and research before we start making and wearing a crochet cotton snood. All right? Let's just process this. Can we wear crochet accessories in the 1860s? Sometimes yes. Sometimes yes. Crochet mitts? No. Those are knitted. And also not extremely common, but they can be knitted. Crocheted snoods? No, absolutely not. Crocheted reticules or the little drawstring purses? No. Crocheted collars? If it's done in white, not in ecru and cream, in a very tiny crochet cotton, we're talking size 20 to size 50, then yes, you may use a period crochet pattern to crochet yourself a collar. Sontags? Absolutely not. I see this a lot and it needs to stop. The earliest crochet Sontag pattern we have is 1866. That is post-war. All of the pre-war ones are knitted. All the extant pre-war ones are knitted. All the photographs that we have of wartime Sontags are knitted. Some of them are actually quilted, so you don't have to do them in yarn. But there are no crochet ones. Sontags during the American Civil War are knitted. How about crochet jacket or pelerines? If it's from a period pattern, made in wool, not cotton. And Peterson's is actually a really good place to look for crochet patterns for women. Peterson's magazine, good place. And it should be done in a fingering weight wool yarn. You can go for it. Now I know I've ranted about snoods before, but they need to be burned. All of them just collectively need to be burned, seriously. Unless you're doing 1940s, and then I can make an exception. As long as you're using an actual 1940s pattern and wearing them appropriately, we can make an exception for that. But otherwise, if you own a snood, I have a request. I want you to bring it to your next Living History event, gather all the formerly snooded ladies together, and put them in the cook fire. Every last crochet snood needs to go into that fire, and we need to watch them burn. And then we need to have a ceremony where we vow never to put a piece of crocheted cotton on our head again. Again, unless you do 1940s, and then I'll allow that. Period hairnets are knitted and not crocheted, done in a very fine or invisible net, and in the wearer's hair color, or else in colored silk chenille, which is appropriate, or even velvet ribbon, and those are not usually netted, those are usually basket weaved almost. And those are okay for high fashion outfits. Your hair still needs to be dressed or put up underneath them. This is not a place to store your loose spaghetti hair. We dress our hair and then we put the hairnet over top. And they're also not called snoods. Snoods is a Scottish term for the ribbon that goes around the head. It is not referred to the thing that contains the hair. That is just a net. But for real, y'all, I'm going to need y'all to back away from the crochet hooks until you get yourself some actual period patterns and proper wool yarn. Crochet done in cotton wasn't quite a fashion thing for clothing. Now for home decoration items, that's totally different. But for clothing, especially for women, crochet didn't really kick off for women's clothing until 1864. Can you find patterns before then? Absolutely. But they really pick up in 1864, and you start seeing a lot more women's garments being crocheted in that time period. So late war, you can actually get away with a lot more crochet stuff. Pre-1864, it's going to be a lot harder to justify. But you can do it if you find a period pattern. There's even an 1855 pattern for a crochet jacket. I have made that one. It is crocheted to look like knitting. It takes a lot of work, but the finished garment looks like it's knitted, not crocheted, because crochet just wasn't really a thing for women's clothing in this time period. Children's clothing, yes. Home decor items, absolutely. Women's stuff, it picks up a little bit of steam. You see it a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, but it really picks up in 1864. Knitting was vastly more popular than crochet. Crochet was a very new kind of fad-ish item where people were kind of just learning how to crochet, honestly, because it was still fairly new. But you would have learned to knit as a child. So most people knew how to knit. It was crochet that was the newer thing. And I get it. I'm a fast crocheter and I'm a very slow knitter, but sometimes you do have to struggle for authenticity. And for number 7, we need to stop using the Battenberg parasols. How are they wrong, you ask? So many reasons. Let's start with the fact that Battenberg wasn't even invented until the 1890s or the 1880s or whatever. It's way past our time period, okay? I don't study that time period. I don't really care, but it's way past our time period. So that's strike 1. And secondly, there's usually plastic parts and pretty obvious plastic parts. How inauthentic. And then there's a size. Have you seen a proper mid-19th century parasol before? If you think the Battenberg parasols are correct, then I'm going to guess you probably have not. And let me enlighten you, because I actually collect these things. This is my box of parasols from 1855 to 1900. I have a whole box of earlier parasols as well. Do you see how tiny? This is not a child's parasol. This is actually a grown woman's parasol. When you're properly dressed, the only thing that should be showing is from your neck up to your face and the back of your neck. You should have gloves on when you're fully dressed out. You'll be like have a bonnet and you're using a parasol. Thus, you would have gloves on, and you're covered to the toe. The only thing that needs to be shaded is right here. Why carry a giant parasol when all you need to shade is right here? These are easier to carry around. You can stick them in a pocket when you're not using them. If you're in a carriage, you can fold them up. They sit in your lap without causing issues with other passengers. We're getting the boring parasols out. This is about 1861. Yeah. See? Still pretty small. This one's a marquee. Actually, the other one's a marquee too. I just didn't show you. But I do this fun thing. Most of these parasols I bought probably 20 bucks to 100 bucks. You can usually find them on eBay. They're usually sold as child's parasols, so sometimes if you search child's parasols, they pop up. You're looking for something in the 18 to 24 inch diameter range. If it folds, that's fantastic. There were walking parasols, but you generally want one that folds. I'm trying to find one that's not black. They had other colored parasols, I promise. This is what a frame looks like when it's not covered. It's also another marquee. This beautiful bone handle. And yeah, I'm calling it bone. One that actually might be a child's parasol. It's like 12 inches in diameter. It came off of this parasol, I believe. But you can see size difference. What I actually believe to be a child's parasol. Adult woman's parasol. There's a difference. I have no need for a child's parasol yet, but it was in really bad shape and the ribs are all broken, so I need to fix the ribs. I'm looking for a particular parasol and I don't know which it is because I wrap all these in acid-free tissue paper and I can't find what I need. That's 1870s. That doesn't help us. That's recovered, but this is a British parasol. I'm kind of looking for my blue one because my blue one's pretty. This one's also been recovered, but it has its original fringe. It's British because of the fringe was really an 1850s thing. This is a very early war parasol. This is its original cover. You can't get silk brocade like that very easily today. So I chose a stripe, which is authentic because I have another identical parasol in terms of the fact that it's British, but it has a blue stripe cover. I was kind of looking for that one. I have so many black parasols, it's ridiculous. To be fair, black goes with everything. Oh, this is late. That's post-war. That's post-war. We're not going to show that one. I don't want to give anyone ideas. What you're going to do next is exchange your bad parasols for parasols that are too late. This is another one I think might be a child's parasol. And you can see how bad the cover is. But mostly because I think it's a child's parasol because of how thin and fine and small the handle is. It's not so much about the canopy, it's more about the handle. Still pretty small. It could be an adult woman's parasol, but just given this right here, I think it really is a child's parasol. And yes, she needs help. I don't know where that blue one is. It's in here somewhere. I don't feel like digging for it. But that should really give you an idea of the size of a proper period parasol. Also, when we look at the Battenberg parasols, they are fully laced with nothing underneath. So do they really do anything for keeping the sun away? The lace has holes in it. So is that really going to do its job? That's why period parasols with lace have silk underneath, and those things are expensive. We're talking like $200 back in 1860. Those are very expensive parasols. You had to be quite wealthy to be able to afford one of those. For regular people, you're going to want something like one of the smaller black parasols I showed. They're American made usually, and they're marquee parasols, which I showed you did the flippy thing. And they were selling for about $1, $1.50, sometimes $2, depending on the style. And they were always in black silk. They had black handles and frames. They have black finials that are usually wooden. That's why they're so cheap. There's no bone, no ivory, no nothing on them that's expensive. It was all black silk, which is pretty cheap. They're either left plain or sometimes with ruffles. I've seen 1, 2, and 3 ruffles. So it's kind of just where you, I guess what you wanted. So that's like a very typical economy parasol that most of you would want. By the way, by the 1840s here in Texas, we could order parasols like straight from the supplier that came from New Orleans, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Italy, Paris, and London, among other places. And they were imported and used. Even out in the wild frontier, you can get nice things and just order them. Fringe was pretty well out by 1861, and ruffles come in, and yeah, I do have a lot of parasols. Battenbergs are my particular version because I think I collect them and I enjoy the original parasols. And I'd also sort of like to see our ritualistic burning ceremony include some of those Battenberg parasols, and let's replace them with some nice ones. I'm not even going to justify talking about these stupid plastic nylon parasols that get carried at events. Those are also bad. So going back to crochet things for number 8, we're going to talk about vintage collars and cuffs and using them. That needs to stop. Just because your grandmother made it doesn't mean that it's appropriate for 1860. That is a disservice and honestly quite insulting to your grandmother to insinuate that she was around in 1860. We need to be using period patterns for our accessories and not just our dresses. I know so many ladies do an excellent job on their dresses that they're just impeccable, and they just basically say screw it and pull their accessories from Goodwill or from Amazon, or sometimes their local high school's theater department. I'm telling you, it's gotta be, they look awful. And I've seen some lovely correct gowns ruined by some awful costume accessories. It's better to go without any accessories than to use bad ones. I fall into this pitfall too, but it is better to go without than to use something bad. Always go without before using a non-period substitution. Now let's talk belts. I'm looking at those cotton Medici belts made to match the cotton skirt that people wear. That was never a thing. First off, a plain belt in silk or Petersham ribbon is going to be the most common belt that we see. Were there shape belts? Absolutely. I often see them being called girdles and not belts. Belts occasionally they're basically interchangeable terms. And yes, the word Medici belt is an actual term. And Medici girdle is also a thing. These are always silk, or they're silk or velvet, and usually that's silk velvet. There was cotton velvet at the time, but I'm not sure of its use in the belt situation. I haven't handled enough of them to know that. And I've seen plenty of references to them in black, but also in colors such as blue. They were not made to match an actual outfit. They were mostly accessory pieces that would go with a variety of outfits. And not ties, but like sash bits that come out from either the front or the back. If there are points on the belt, I most often see 2 or 3 points. And it's not uncommon to read about silk tassels being put on the end of each point. But again, there's so many other belting options for the 1860s. There's nothing wrong with a plain belt, 1 to 2 inches wide, made in silk or even a Petersham ribbon, with or without a belt buckle. Sarah Gonzalez of Ensembles from the Past, and also Beth Miller Hall, both from Etsy, they sell fantastic reproduction belt buckles that are sturdy, copied from originals, and beautiful. Sarah actually also sells Petersham belting ribbon for you in a variety of colors and styles and patterns if you'd like to pursue that option. You can also take a plain silk belt and add sashes in a variety of styles. Again, all of these are going to be silk or velvet. Even if you're wearing them on a cotton or wool dress, they're still going to be done in silk or velvet. These accessories are not done in cotton. It seems weird to us, but remember, different time period. What makes logical sense to us does not often translate to the 1860s. Things were done a certain way back then. Social norms were far more important. Clothing norms were essential in how you were perceived and treated. They were much more aware of fibers and the limitations and qualities of each, and knew what to use for the greatest advantage. Fibers are not interchangeable. So now, as a collective thing, we need to stop doing as women. It has to do with outerwear. Can we please stop wearing men's overcoats and such? There are women's outerwear, and we need to be wearing women's garments if we're going to portray ourselves as women. Yes, it's just a coat, but seriously, gender clothing was much more of a big deal back then than it is now. So having a woman wearing a man's garment would be highly unusual. And there are plenty of options for women's outerwear. There are shawls that can be triangular or worn single layer. You could do a 16-inch square folded in half to form a triangle, so you have a double layer shawl. You can do a rectangle that's folded in half and then folded into a triangle, so you have a very warm 4-layer triangular shawl, and that's for extra warmth. There are the knitted Sontags, got that, knitted, we discussed that before. There are patterns in the ladies' books for knitted jackets, some crochet jackets, especially again as you hit that 1864 or so. There's wool or silk unfitted jackets or sack coats, and they are totally big. And of course there's the larger paletots and coats as well. Cloaks are a thing as well. I don't think, they don't seem to be as popular as like a jacket or a coat would be, but they are around. And I'm not going to say women never wore man's coats. I mean, you could probably find a single example of a lot of these things, but that doesn't mean that it should be worn by anybody. Now, there may be a very specific scenario where you're portraying a very specific person who did something very extra special, and in that scenario, it would, of course, be appropriate to do the weird thing as long as context is provided to the public. This context is generally given through other women dressed in more average ways to kind of show the oddness of this. And I know I've talked about ratios in that before, and by that I just mean making sure that the rate of something that shows up in period literature, extant pieces, and photographs matches up with what we're doing at events. So let's review 5 things that lady living historians need to stop doing. Our next section is headwear. So number 11 is wearing bangs. Please stop wearing your bangs loose in front of your face for 1860s. Use some pomade and slick them back so where no one can tell you have bangs. Bangs are not a thing in the 1860s. Okay, they kind of were in England for little girls, but not for adult women in America. Absolutely not. Just please stop it. You can absolutely have your bangs for modern wear. I'm not saying you had to adopt your modern life to this weird hobby that we all have. Absolutely not. But there are ways to hide bangs. If your hair is really fine, again, using pomade is an excellent period choice to slick back your hair. Even if your hair is really fine, you can use a couple of hairpins in addition to the pomade to kind of hold them in place and then like cover that with a cap or a bonnet or a hairnet. Little Bits Historical on Etsy has some great period pomades in a variety of scents and different textures for different types of hair. You can also make your own. My go-to recipe is from 1863. I absolutely love this one. It works really well for my hair. So it is 4 ounces of almond oil, 4 ounces of olive oil, 1 ounce spermaceti, and 2 ounces of castor oil. You're going to melt those, and then you're stirring 70 drops of a perfume. By the way, spermaceti is no longer legal to get because it does come from a whale. But you can get the vegetable version of spermaceti. It's called cetylpomatate, I think is how you pronounce that. I use it from all my spermaceti recipes because it was used all the time in the 19th century. So I use it for like candles and for cosmetics and that sort of thing. It's a bit expensive to use for candles, but I do occasionally like to do that because it's fun. They do burn differently, so I like to offer that occasionally. For the pomade perfume or scent, I used a recipe, describe this in the same recipe. So it's mixed together and shake well. 8 drops of clove oil, 25 drops of English lavender oil, 1 dram each of bergamot, and also of lemon. A dram is 3/4 of a teaspoon, I believe. And then 10 drops each of cassia, which is cinnamon, and otto of roses. Personally, I can only handle certain essential oils. I get migraines, or it just makes me very nauseous if I have certain oils. And so I take out the cassia, the cinnamon, and the cloves. I can't handle those. I can do all of the citrus scents most of the time. There's some orange ones that do bother me. And I can do a lot of the floral scents, not all of them, but I can do some florals. And so I can use the rest of those. I just can't do the cassia or the cloves, unfortunately. So I take those out, but you can absolutely add those back in if you would like. I still have like 2 containers left, so I've got plenty of pomade to last me for a while. A little goes a long way. And even if you don't have bangs, you should be using pomade to like keep your hair neat and smooth and also kind of shiny. But yeah, bangs are not an American thing till the 1880s, so let's grow them out if you like, but you absolutely do not have to. You can always adapt, use some pomade, pins, keep them out of the way, but just stop wearing them loose. The 12th thing we need to stop doing is to stop wearing modern straw hats from Amazon, Goodwill, and Walmart. They are not the same shape or materials as a period straw hat. Also, straw hats are for fashion, not for field work. You want a sunbonnet for working class situations. When you see working women in the 19th century, 99% of them or more are wearing sunbonnets. And even for going into town or being around your camp, a modern straw hat looks nothing like a 19th century straw hat. You want a very low crown, something that's no more than 2 to 3 inches-ish. And often the sides of the hats are narrower than the front and the back. And sometimes like these hats have like a little curve to them to where they kind of curve down in the front and the back and give it a nice little shape. Decorations will primarily sit at the front of the hat, which is different from how we do it today. And sometimes there are ribbon or lace tails in the back, but you are 100% absolutely not going to be able to find a appropriate hat at a modern retailer. Anna Warden Bowersmith does excellent work, and she does period straw hats by hand. I'd highly recommend her Etsy shop. She does runs of hats, so they're not always in stock, but if you just follow her page, you can see when she has more up for sale. They're absolutely worth it. I love my 1850s open work bonnet that Anna did. It's one of my favorite bonnets. It's actually my favorite pre-1860 bonnet. It's my second favorite bonnet that I have at all. Anna's hats are going to be an investment piece, so you may have to save up for one, but her work is absolutely worth it. In the meantime, make a sunbonnet from one of the free patterns out there. that I will hopefully remember to link below for you. The next thing we need to stop doing is, was really big about 10 to 15 years ago. I don't see it as much now. It's slowly going away, thankfully, but I just wanted to mention it here, is wearing those pork pie or the brimless hats. The pork pie or the little brimless hats are going to be very late to post-war, and they're not appropriate for most impressions. They are period, again, if you're doing very late to post-war, and they are not really around before then and should not be used. I know people really like this style because it feels more edgy, but it can't be worn for most of the war, so we do need to stop wearing a lot of those. And even at the very end of the war, you still want to be pretty fashionable to have one. They weren't universal. Number 14 is a Little House on the Prairie sunbonnets. You know we're going to talk about this one. I've talked about it before. I see this less on adult women though, and I see a lot of adult women letting their daughters wear these. And I see them a lot at Sutlers. Which Sutlers? I understand that you're not only supplying for reenactors, you're supplying mostly for the public as like souvenirs and like costumey things. I get it. However, new reenactors assume that you're doing the right thing, you're doing authentic stuff. So we need to make sure everything that we have is right. It's not just for the public. We need to make sure we're doing things right by them and giving them accurate pieces. So I get that this style of bonnet is very cheap, it's readily available, but little girls deserve proper headwear as well, not just the adults. So corded bonnets are going to be very nice for the young ladies in the hobby because they're not as rigid as a slat bonnet. But let's go ahead and go over what's wrong with the bonnets that I mentioned before, the Little House on the Prairie bonnets, as I call them. So let's start with the shape of the brim. Mid-19th century sunbonnets tend to have a straight brim with no shaping. It's just straight kind of across the face. The back of modern sunbonnets tends to be far too poofy. And then there's the curtains, or lack thereof. Modern bonnets do not either do not have a curtain or have a very, very narrow curtain, which don't protect the neck, which is kind of one of the purposes of a bonnet, is to protect the back of the neck, especially for children. Period sunbonnets have curtains that at least go past the shoulders. I've seen them past the waist, so you can do a really long curtain on that as well. And also, while we're here, please, 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 please stop making your bonnets match your dresses, especially for little girls. That was not a thing. We do not have coordinating sets like that. That is just not a thing. They didn't typically match articles like that back then. They coordinated, not matched. So stop matching your outfits. It looks ridiculous on the 19th century trained eye. And finally, our last one, we're going to talk about caps. Please stop making caps to wear out of doilies and handkerchiefs. I know when it comes to looking for photographs and fashion plates, we're seeing these white things on the ladies' heads and thinking, oh, you up in just doily and it looks the same, right? It's not. Period caps, which are usually just worn in the morning with a wrapper, which is why they're sometimes called breakfast caps or morning caps, and not worn throughout the day most of the time. They're going to be structured with wire, sometimes with wire, and they're made of very fine materials. We're talking fine cotton or silk net, which by the way runs about $50 to $100 a yard today. Like it's not cheap. A few yards of very fine cotton or silk lace, we're talking silk ribbons, sometimes set on wire foundations. Bobby pinning a handkerchief onto your head is not the same thing. Making a polyester or nylon version isn't the same. Synthetic fibers lay differently and they don't drape the same way as natural fibers would. Yeah, we can tell the difference. If you're in a situation for a breakfast cap, please do it right. Most women are not going to be wearing caps throughout the day. Some will. You can find appropriate cap patterns, especially for older women. We like to think that women had to have their hair covered back then, and that's just not true whatsoever. A lot of women did not have their hair covered at this time. There were also like fancy cap-like headdresses worn for evening wear as well, but again, none of them are polyester and nylon, and none of them resemble doilies or handkerchiefs. And that's about it for this video. Did any of these surprise you, or did you learn something new about the 1860s? Please let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video, and as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.